Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming this morning. Thank you for getting up early, taking your coffee, whatever you needed to get here. I'm glad you're here. I'm very excited to be giving this talk today. It's the first time that we've been able to talk about our Exchange Web Services Managed API publicly. PDC 08's the first time that we're going to be able to talk about a managed API, a .NET API for accessing Exchange data, really doing everything that you can do through Outlook programmatically. So let's jump into, this wouldn't be PDC 08 without a discussion of software plus services and what that means to Exchange and what that means to you as Exchange developers. So we'll be talking about that today. We'll really be talking about what we've done with Exchange 2007 and to get it ready for this cloud scenario. We'll be talking about our Exchange 2007 APIs and make it really clear the direction that we're going with our developer story. And we'll talk about what we've done to make Exchange 2007 cloud ready. After talking about that briefly, we'll jump into Exchange Web Services. I don't know how familiar the crowd here is today with Exchange Web Services, so I'll give you an overview and then we'll drill down into some specific details of it. We'll talk about the Exchange Web Services as a whole. I would talk about the managed API and why we think it's such a great tool for you guys to have. So let's jump in and talking about what it means to move Exchange into the cloud. As most of you know, Exchange is traditionally an on-premises application. It traditionally runs on someone's customer's site. They've got staff to maintain it. They've got local line of business application developers. Maybe there's some ISV applications built on it. We do see that this is the vast majority today, but we do see this starting to change. And what we see is that there are a set of customers who are looking to move Exchange into the cloud. They're looking to potentially not have to have staff on premises that's focused on being Exchange experts. They want Microsoft to be the experts. You heard Dave Thompson talk about today, on Monday the Microsoft Online and specifically the Exchange Online work that we're doing. This is the first real offering that Microsoft has had around hosting Exchange. And the great thing about it, as we'll get into, is that this is a platform that's ready for you guys to start developing against. It's currently in beta, but we actually do have web service access, and all of the demos that we do today will be demoed against a beta account on Microsoft Online. So these web services are there. They're available for you. What we're starting to see is as Exchange moves into the cloud, there is this question about, can I move my Exchange into the cloud and maintain my applications on premises that I've been running in the past? And the answer with Exchange Web Services is yes, you can do that. We'll talk about what that looks like. We're also seeing, I think, with Microsoft Azure announced this week, that there will be this model of Exchange in the cloud as well as your applications in the cloud. And in this case, they may not even want to be running their applications locally, and maybe you as an ISV would like to host your applications in the cloud so you don't have to actually invest in that infrastructure, or the customer doesn't have to invest in this infrastructure to run your applications. So this could be a service which you sell, which is cloud-based, which can connect to other people who have got Exchange Online in the cloud, and now take advantage of the rich Exchange ecosystem, rich Exchange development environment for a cloud-based service. So I think that the key things to understand about this is that it won't, there's not one that we say every single customer will be using. It's a continuum. As customers want or care less about the control and having control over the physical hardware, the physical topology, they're more likely to move their Exchange into the cloud. We say that conversely, as the complexity decreases as you go towards the cloud and increases as you go towards these on-premise deployments. So the customers who want to minimize complexity are more likely to move their deployments to the cloud. Customers who can handle the complexity, more likely to keep it on premises. So what we see is that there is definitely a continuum for applications. And what we wanted to develop was as a development paradigm where developers could write applications both against on-premises as well as in the cloud. And those applications didn't need to be rewritten, don't need to be rewritten for either of these two scenarios. And the idea is you can write an application that works on premises, and then if the customer moves into the cloud, or if you have a segment of customers that are in the cloud, it just works against the cloud. We're able to achieve that with web services, and we'll go into how. But first, I want to take a step back and talk about Exchange 2000, 2003, because most of you who have been doing Exchange development are probably most familiar with Exchange 2000, 2003. So I want to just take a step back and make sure you understand what that architecture looked like and how it's different from Exchange 2007. So in Exchange 2000, 2003, we had CDOEX, we had XLADB. These were interfaces which ran on the mailbox server. We also had WebDAV, which you could connect from HTTP to the mailbox server. Problem was it was a very monolithic architecture. So everything ran on that box that was running our store process. As you developed applications which used more and more resources, you had to scale out that mailbox server. So you'd have to add another physical mailbox server. And as any of you know who deal with Exchange, mailbox servers are the most expensive component of a deployment. So we did not have a great scale story for moving into the cloud, where really highly scalable is very important. The other problem was that if you wanted a good client-side API, CDO 121 was our only solution, and it really locked you into a Windows client, and it used RPC, so it wasn't remotable over the internet. So we took a look at this and realized that for the future, for Exchange 2007 and beyond, we really needed to change the development paradigm for Exchange. So we took a big bet on web services. And what we did was we built a true middle tier, a client access server, which we would enable web services to the middle tier. This middle tier could be placed on the internet, all traffic to it, HTTP-based, WSR, SSL encryption. And then the CAS server back to the client access server could use RPC, which is very efficient for close proximity communication. What this really gave us was the ability now that as your applications scale out and as your applications become more demanding on the Exchange resources, we now scale out the client access tier instead. And scaling out a client access tier is much more cost efficient. You go into a customer site and say you need an extra client access server, that's a much more palatable thing than you need another mailbox server. So we really focused on making a good NT architecture where we could scale out that client access server. And all communications with it is done over web services. So we can certainly have cross-platform clients, which we've got applications out there today that are running on Mac that use web services as well as Windows. And another key change that we made was we started really looking at what it meant to put Outlook onto web services, to get Outlook starting to use web services. And we really saw some great value there. Mainly that as we invested in new features for Outlook and enabled them through web services, developers could now take advantage of those same web services for building their applications. And traditionally, this has been a very difficult challenge because CDOEX, XLDB, WebDAV, none of those were built on by Outlook. So whenever we would have to dual invest in APIs, and the APIs never seemed to keep up with Outlook. Now with Exchange 2007 and Outlook 2007, new features like the Outlook Availability Service, which is a very rich view into free busy information, now uses our web services. The Outlook Out of Office Attendant now uses our web services. So you as a developer can use those same APIs that Outlook uses. So let's talk one more slide just to give you a clear understanding of why we think web services is so important and where we're going. So this matrix will show you the full API set of Exchange 2007. But I want to make it clear throughout this talk that we are investing completely in web services moving forward. And here's really why. If you look at this matrix, you see that there's a developer responsible for interop or Microsoft responsible for interop. A developer being responsible for interop is not good. Those of you who are MAPI developers out here know that it means that you have to reverse engineer essentially what Outlook is doing, setting every property. If Microsoft's responsible, for example, CDO is one way, CDOEX, then we take on the burden of creating a meeting request compatible with all of our different clients. So that's really a key distinguisher. If you look at an API, we really want the business logic to be there for you. You don't want to have to set, in WebDAV, for example, 400 lines of code to actually send a meeting request. So we'll go into why that's important a little bit later as well. Down the side, you can see local access, whether it's access from the intranet or internet. And you can see that really the only quadrant that's really good for a hosted cloud service is one that's accessible from the internet. So if you look at our legacy APIs, XLADB and CDOEX, those are local access only. Not good for scalability, not good for security reasons, because they actually have to put the code on the mailbox server. On the intranet, we had MAPI, which very powerful, but it only works on the internet because it uses RPC, and it's a lot of developer involvement in actually setting every single property right, a property bag essentially. Very difficult to program with. We came up with CDO, which provided an object model, not a managed code object model, a COM object model around this interface. It's not accessible through managed code though, and the interface is incomplete because it just does not continue to evolve along with Outlook. So for internet accessibility, we have WebDAV, but WebDAV is similar to MAPI, and it really just gives you property bag access. So what we looked across these APIs, none of these APIs really gave us what developers were asking for, which is an easy way to develop against Exchange, cross-platform, on the intranet or on the internet, and to really be something that could be enabled in the cloud. And that's the magic quadrant that we hit with Exchange Web Services, where Microsoft takes care of the interop, Microsoft takes care of validating OA, Exchange ActiveSync, the interop with web services, and it's internet accessible. So let's dive into web services for those of you who aren't too familiar or just want a refresher on what you can do with it. So Exchange Web Services is open standards based. XML, SOAP, we have a WSDL file which defines all of our types. It's strongly typed access. We've got message objects, task objects, contacts, calendars, folders. Basically, all of the primary types that Exchange user has in their mailbox, you can access using web services. We give you great workflow functionality. When I talk about workflow, I'm not talking about Windows workflow. I'm talking about the kind of workflow that a user goes through in their day as they're using Exchange. I'm talking about free busy lookup, being able to find the best meeting time for a group of 10 people. Exchange can automatically do that for you. Exchange can go find suggested meeting times. When is the first time when a group of 10 or 20 people are all available? Accepting, updating, sending meeting requests, all that workflow around what happens if I get a meeting request in, maybe for a resource, and I want to accept it, or I want to tentatively accept it and send back a response. Web Services encapsulates all that for you. So just think about the applications you can build when you realize that all of that logic that users are doing through Outlook, interacting with meetings, is actually strongly typed and is actually done for you in Exchange Web Services. It's very, very powerful. We've added in 2007 SP1, which just recently released, the ability to do delegation and permissions. So you can set permissions on folders. You can set free busy permissions to enable users to collaborate more easily and without having to actually go into Outlook and set the settings correctly. You can actually do that through web services. We support things like, of course, notifications. So if a new item has arrived in a folder, we'll notify you. We've got a rich notification model for updates, for deletes, and the notifications can then be used to trigger synchronization. So for example, we've got a number of customers out there who have built CRM connectors with Exchange. So if you update a contact in Exchange, you get a notification that a contact's changed, and your CRM application can then go get those contacts from a user's personal contact folder and pull them into the CRM database, and now keep systems in sync. Very rich, very powerful synchronization. It's built on the same synchronization logic that Outlook uses, as well as the same synchronization logic that Exchange ActiveSync uses. So a very robust model of synchronization. So drilling in a little bit deeper, let's look at really architecturally what we're talking about. So we've got a data access layer, which gives us access to Exchange mailboxes and in public folders. We've got a business logic layer, which is shared with Outlook Web Access, with Exchange ActiveSync, unified messaging, basically all of the roles that run on a client access server. And this is really important because this means that when you create a meeting request using Exchange Web Services, it is really going through the same code path as Outlook Web Access, which means that the compatibility between them is much more assured than if they're going through two completely separate code paths. So our goal was really to build a single layer which all of our protocols running on our client access server could access data through. Beyond that, we've got in Exchange 2007, we enabled the ability to create, update, delete folder items and attachments through our web services APIs. You could do it using our auto-generated APIs. So Visual Studio will auto-generate these classes for you from our WSDL file, or you could use the raw XML. You could do things, again, like availability, OOF settings. We have some utilities like resolving names. You can resolve names, the best match for a string, expand distribution lists. So we've got Active Directory access as well. In 2007 SP1, we added a whole host of additional functionality. The first delegate access and delegate management functionality that Exchange has had. So the ability to add delegates, remove delegates, update delegates. We added public folder support, post items. So this was essentially an extension of our 2007 schema. So users, as soon as they upgraded 2007 SP1, got this additional functionality. What I'm going to be drilling into next and talking about is the EWS Managed API, which really takes development of Exchange to a whole new level in terms of ease and simplicity. You may be sitting there thinking, well, you've already got these APIs. Why do I really care about a .NET API? If you've used our auto-generated proxies, I think you agree that they're powerful, but they can be very difficult to get your head around and to be extremely productive in them. And let's drill into a little bit more on why that is. So today you've got one option. You've got your raw XML. That's what a number of our developers out there do, although we do find that it's a relatively few proportion to the auto-generated proxies. Here's a standard request. We're SOAP-based. So really the only thing different is we've got a SOAP wrapper around our base calls. And you get a response back. You have to parse it out from the XML. It's great for those of you out there who really like raw, down-to-the-metal development. But there, as Don Bach said, there are a lot of developers out there who like dots. So for the developers that like dots, we've got the auto-generated proxies. Now, what this code is doing in both of these examples is just retrieving inbox, the inbox folder ID, and a couple properties off of that inbox. So you see before is about 9 lines of XML, 10, 15 lines of XML. Here it's about, I guess, 12 lines of auto-generated proxy code. Auto-generated proxy code is nice because it's no longer parsing XML. You've got class-based access, and it is cross-platform. There are Java auto-generated proxy clients. But the problem with it is there is no ability to have client-side logic, and we really can't have a customized look and feel around the API. So what we've strived to do with the managed API is to really simplify it into what does a developer expect. So in one line of code, we're binding to an inbox folder, retrieving a reference to that inbox folder, retrieving some properties off of it like display name by default, right? So very easy, just what you expect. If you want to bind to a folder, there you go. This is what it would look like. It's Windows only .NET 3.5, fully object-oriented, and it does let us introduce smart client-side logic. What do I mean by smart client-side logic? I'm talking about auto-discover, which allows you to dynamically find the endpoint for your service, whether it's hosted in the cloud or on premises, as well as some other logic around conversions of times and really making it easy for you to develop without having to implement a lot of lookup logic, for example, looking into the registry for time zones before you create a meeting. We'll drill into this a little bit more. So just to understand the continuum, there are 3 ways to access Exchange. All 3 of them are perfectly valid with our web services. It's your choice. You've got raw XML, auto-generated proxies, and what we'll be talking about today is the EWS managed API. Certainly, productivity we've seen as developers have moved over to use it, increased productivity drastically as you move from the raw XML over to the managed API. So the goals of Exchange Web Services Managed API were threefold. First off, number one, Exchange development is easy. We really wanted to make it easy for ISVs, for developers to go from the kind of dream stage of, wouldn't it be cool if Exchange could do this, to actually having a prototype and then actually having code. And what we saw was developers were thinking all these great ideas, but it was that kind of scared, hesitant step of, do I have to learn MAPI? I really don't want to have to learn MAPI. Do I have to, can't I just use managed code? Oh, I can use managed code with web services, but then do I have to go buy a book to really understand it? So we really wanted to take it from becoming kind of scared to being something that was just intuitive. You just knew you could pick it up, and you could probably get through a day of coding and actually have something right there that was actually good, and you felt like you had been productive in that day. We also wanted to implement the smart client-side features that we have not been able to have in the past. The second piece is we wanted this API to expose the full power of web services. We wanted to enable rich things like batch processing for highly performant applications, delegate access for these permission scenarios, as well as custom properties. So properties that Exchange may not expose as first-class properties, but were available as second-class properties. What we didn't want is people to look at the managed API as not as good as what the protocol had because we weren't as feature-rich. So our goal is to be at feature parity with the web services APIs themselves. And thirdly, we really wanted to enable this transition of thinking about all code as running on the premises or having to code it for running on premises to be able to write code that runs on premises or in the cloud. And so our goal was that the API really insulated you from worrying about where Exchange was located. You could write your code once and run it in either place or against either place. Okay, so I think we've talked a lot about overview, and this is PDC, so I don't want to show any more slides. I'll show maybe 1 or 2 but later on. But I'd like to actually start coding. So I'm going to have Alice Tang come up, one of my team members on the Exchange Web Services team. And she's going to walk you through just some simple coding exercises to show you how quickly it is to get up and going with Exchange Web Services. So thank you, Alice. And let's switch over to the laptop here. The first thing we'll talk about is just how you authenticate with the service, and then how you do auto-discover to actually bootstrap and find the correct endpoint for your Exchange Web Services application.
Okay, so to demonstrate the coding today, what we've done is we've created a simple WPF application. It's just a form with 2 buttons. And I'm going to go into the code right now and then auto-discover the service. One of the things that I did want to show you is the namespaces that we're using for our client API. And they are Exchange Web Services auto-discover to connect to the endpoint, and then Exchange Web Services data to get the mailbox data that you'd like to get out of your mailbox. So let's get started. The very first step that you need to do is connect to the service. So I'm going to type in Exchange Service. And I'm just going to call it My Service. And I'm going to new up an Exchange service. That's it. And then after that, I'm going to add some credentials so that it knows which service I'm going to talk to.
You can go down to the...
Oh, sorry.
So we're going to create the service object. We're going to set the credentials on it. These credentials are actually, you can specify them explicitly, and that's what Alice is going to do in this example, is set the credentials on the endpoint explicitly. If you don't set them explicitly, the managed API will also use your default credentials that you're logged in with. So if this were running under, if Alice were logged in as Alice to this machine, which she's not, it would actually just use those credentials by default. She's using Alice's creds here in this example.
Okay, sorry about that. The next step that we're going to do is discover the endpoint. So what endpoint should we be talking to? And so I'll say my service dot auto discover URL. And then there's a couple options here. You can just give the email address, or we have a couple of different options there. So I'm going to type in my email address, which is alice@ewsonline1, microsoftonline.com. And as Jason said, we're actually connecting to a hosted exchange right now.
Yeah, so this is something really important. We don't want you to ever hard code a URL to Exchange again. You should always be using auto-discover to auto-discover your endpoint. It auto-discovers the most efficient endpoint and ensures that if this user, Alice at ewsonline1.microsoftonline.com, moves into the cloud, your application automatically starts looking at the cloud or anywhere else that it gets moved in the world, essentially. So why don't we run through it?
Okay, so I'm going to F5 and run through it. I've set the breakpoint. And let me show the output window, actually. See if it's running. So it takes a little bit to auto-discover the endpoint.
Okay, so let's hit F10. Let's step past auto-discover. And what you'll see is that it's going to take a couple seconds this first time that we auto-discover. So what we recommend doing, and what Alice will do in this demo, is create a cache of the auto-discover URL after the first time that it's looked up. And the reason this takes a while is we're using the same auto-discover algorithm that Outlook uses, which is essentially looking at the right-hand side of the SMTP address, looking for autodiscover.ewsonline1.microsoft.com. If we don't find that, we're going to go look at another autodiscover, or ewsonline1.microsoftonline.com/autodiscover. We don't find it there. We'll look for a redirect. So Alice is going to hover over the My Service, and you'll see here the font's kind of small, but you can see red001.mail.microsoftonline.com is the EWS endpoint. So AutoDiscover has gone out, discovered where in the world this user lives, and now has set the URL that this service is going to be using to this URL. Great. So we're going to go back and...
so I'm going to take off the breakpoint here and just comment this out for now. And we already did the auto-discover before the demo to save a little bit of time for future. So I'm going to set the URL to the constants.ews URL, and then we'll be ready to run.
Yeah, great. So this is what we recommend you do with your applications as well, that you do auto-discover once per session, and you store that URL for future use until either you need to recreate the session or until you get an error back from EWS indicating to you that you're no longer using the most efficient URL and that you should re-auto-discover.
And you were saying that you should probably cache it maybe once a day, like Outlook does, or every couple of hours, depending on how often you think that the endpoint might change.
Yep, exactly. Great. So that was simple. Should we send a mail next?
Well, mail you can actually do with SMTP or other protocols. You can also do it with EWS, but I thought what might be more interesting today is to actually create an appointment.
Ooh, scary. So WebDAV, 400 lines of code to create an appointment. I don't know, can we do it faster? We'll have to wait and see. We're going to switch back over, and we're going to talk couple more slides. I lied. So calendaring support. We often get asked, what level of calendaring support do we have? We've got the ability to retrieve, create appointments, recurring meetings, recurrence expansion. We'll actually be showing that here shortly, where we're going to be expanding recurrences server-side, so your client doesn't have to deal with that. Meeting request, accept, tentative, decline, update, cancel, send updates, responses, free busy views. I don't know how much we're going to have time to get through today, but we're going to get through as much as we can. So let's talk first briefly about the item class hierarchy. First thing to understand is that everything in an Exchange folder is an item. The base type is item. You get it back, you can always cast anything to an item. We've got upcasts of appointments, email message, contact, task, post item. So these are all, have all the specific properties to these specific data types on them. Something to know about email message is it is actually the base class for meeting message, which is an abstract class, which implements meeting request, meeting response, and meeting cancellation. So you can always get everything back as an item. You can use email message for anything that's usually in the inbox, and then you'll have to upcast from there to meeting request or meeting response if you actually want to accept a meeting, for example. We won't go into that much in detail in the demos, but just want to lay out the hierarchy for you as you're thinking about the managed API. The second thing to understand is the folder class hierarchy. So the folder class hierarchy, base class type of folder. And from it, we've got calendar folder, where we've got special methods like find appointments, which Alice will be demoing next. Contact folder, which has some special contact properties to it. Task folder, and then search folder. I'll spend a little bit of time talking about search folder because it's very powerful. A search folder allows you the ability to create a search folder similar to an Outlook search folder, except it can be an Outlook search folder or it can be hidden from the user. The search folder allows you to specify criteria, like if a message has been read or not, or if a message has PDC in the title. And that search scope can be across an entire mailbox. So you can actually create a folder which will search your entire mailbox. And when you view that folder, you will see a cumulative view essentially of all of the items in your mailbox or in certain subscopes. So we often hear from people things like, I want to know all of the items which have got my special property on them. Or I want to know all the items which don't have my special property on them that I'm tagging an item with that comes in. You can use search folders to actually identify which items have got your special custom tag on there or not. Okay, I think we've done enough of the slides. Let's get back to doing some code.
All right, let me go down to create the appointment. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to say appointment. And I'm going to call it my appointment and new it up basically here. Sorry. Let me put that back. So what I'm saying is that I'm going to create an appointment, but it's associated with the service that I created up above. So I'm just going to say my service. And then I'm going to start adding some attributes to it. So my appointment, let's say the subject is PDC session this morning. And I'll set some other criteria, like a start time. I will say date time dot now. I'll have it start now. And then we'll do my appointment dot end, and we'll have it start, say, an hour from now. One of the other things I'm going to set is the time zone.
So this step here, this 4 lines of code just makes me really happy inside. And I'll tell you why. As Exchange developers know, time zones, dealing with time zones has always been a pain, but they're very, very important. What we're doing now with the client API, giving you the ability to use, for example, timezoneinfo.local, your local time zone, and just pass it straight into this appointment, pass all of your times in the local time context, and just create this meeting at this time right now on this server. So very intuitive. This meeting should show up starting now and ending in an hour, and you don't have to worry about biasing or offsetting things to UTC. Very exciting. Okay, so it looks like we're ready to save. You ready to save it and show them what it looks like?
Well, I was thinking that the audience might be interested in one more feature that we have included in the client API, and that's to add a recurrence. So you told me all the horror stories about how long it would take, thousands of lines of code, and I wanted to show you that it only takes 1 line of code to actually add a recurrence to this meeting.
Brave. So let's show them recurrences.
Yes, very exciting. Be brave today. So I'm going to go up, and I'm going to say my appointment dot recurrence equals new recurrence, and I'm going to set it for once a week.
Once a week? Weekly pattern. Great.
And you can see I can just say, I'll have it start today. Not now. And I'd like for it to recur, say, once a week, and we'll have it start tomorrow. So let me just make sure. Day of week. And you can just say Friday.
Right. So there you go. One line of code, and it'll now be a recurring meeting. So very exciting. Just, I think, pretty intuitive. That's what you'd expect. Awesome. Yay. I agree. I agree. OK.
Well, there's actually 2 lines of code. I have to do one more.
Well, save, but you have to save no matter what, whether it's a recurrence or not. So we're going to save this item, and then we're going to show you it's not all smoke and mirrors. Let's run the code.
You guys ready? All right, F5. Oh, let me take it out of full screen. And what we're going to do is hit create appointments. I'm waiting for it to hit the actual server.
Okay.
And what I've done is I've actually logged in beforehand to the server. And
boom, there we go.
PDC session for
Yep.
this morning.
9 o'clock. It's 9:02 right now. Proof that we weren't lying. And there it is. And it shows up recurring every week. So great.
Yep. I can go ahead a couple of weeks if you guys want to see.
There it is. OK, so next step. It's there. Let's retrieve it.
All right. So I'm going to go to the second button. And that takes a couple of steps. I've written out the comments right here. So what we're going to do is attach to the calendar. Oops. Oh, let me take it out of running code. Shift F5, take it out of debug mode. And I'm going to show you calendar folder equals.
So we're going to use the calendar folder.bind method here. And bind, again, just the way that we showed you earlier, that you can bind to messages, you can bind to a full folder, and we'll bind to it before we actually go retrieve the items.
So, one more thing to point out, that we also added in well-known folders. So I just said well-known folder.calendar.
It's important that it gives you shortcut access to all of the well-known folders in Exchange, sent items, drafts, deleted items. Well-known folders is your friend. That's a great starting point for then traversing the folder tree to find which folder you actually want to create a folder under or create an item in.
And I'm going to create a view that starts, again, I'm going to have it start today.
So this view class is essentially our query class. This is the class that will pass into our find method. The view contains the criteria we want to use for our view. In this case, we're using a calendar view because a calendar view can be passed into find appointments, and which will do recurrence expansion for us on the server. So if you want Exchange to do recurrence expansion, you'll want to use this calendar view and pass it into something like find appointments, which will then do that server-side recurrence expansion.
So I'm typing in appointment. That is better. My appointments. And I'm going to say my cal, find appointments.
Okay. So you see that Alice here has got a find items results appointment, my appointments. And you can get it templated here to appointment, but you could use an item if you actually need a generic interface to pass things back and forth. In this case, we want to have access to the strongly typed members of appointment, so we're just going to use the generic appointment implementation.
All right, and then I'm going to put some code in to actually show it up in the list view. Oops.
So this find appointments call is the call that actually hits the web service, and something that we've done in our IntelliSense to make it clear whenever you're actually making a network call is we'll indicate that that find appointments actually makes a network call. So in this case, we've gotten the appointments back in the find items results appointment collection, and now we're going to go through and actually show these out to the list box.
Okay, items dot add, and should just do the one. All right, I'm going to try to be brave and do the string format here.
A lot of typing. That's why there's two of us here, because I think we wanted to actually show you code, show you how easy it was to write it. And every web services demo I've ever had to do in the past, I've done it with the auto-generated proxies and just had to like show you the code and say, look how easy it is. What I wanted to actually do it is show you how easy it is that we're willing to actually code it live on stage. So,
okay. Interesting thing to know about the appointment are the subject, the start time. Take that in there. Start, and then also the end time. And let me close that off.
Great.
And close that off as well.
Okay, looks like we're good to go.
All right, and just to show you guys the code here, just one last look before we go. And I'm going to hit F5. Oh, oh no. Excuse me there. Oh, sorry about that.
Okay.
Am I missing something else?
Looks good.
It's angry about my for each here.
That's fine. Okay, let's retrieve those appointments, see what we've got. Thinking, thinking, thinking. Remember going out, hitting a live data center in Microsoft, in Redmond actually, coming back, and there we go. You can see that all the times have been locally normalized to the local times, 9:02, 10:02, date, everything displayed right there. So one of the most common questions we get is, how do we paint out a calendar view? There's some calendar controls that have recently been released. You can see how easy it is now to actually take the data from Exchange and just pipe that into a calendar control if you wanted to do that. You'd have a start time and end time, right? Great. Okay, so I know there's a lot of developers out there that are saying, okay, this is great, I see this API, but I really want to know what's going on underneath the covers. What's the data that's actually going back and forth? We gave you a view to do that. So let's show them tracing, Alice.
Sure. Let me turn that on. So again, one line of code. And I have tracing on. So
Cool.
I want to make sure I have the not already in the code, and I'm going to run it again. Let me view the output window to show you that. Clear that out from all the runs before and hit F5. And
Okay.
now we're going to retrieve.
So now with tracing on, we'll keep an eye on this debug window, and we'll see the tracing all be piped to the debug window. If you want, you, of course, can trace out to a log file. We're just showing you the easiest one. So let's scroll up here. Yeah. Okay, so you can see this is all the data that's being transferred back and forth. We did a simple find appointments call, and now look, we've got basically every item that gets returned by the find item's default prop shape. You can see that there's a lot of data. We probably don't need all this data. In fact, Alice only output 3 fields. You don't want to hammer the Exchange server and retrieve every single item for every single property if you can avoid it. So let's try to make this code more efficient. Let's try to get only the properties that we really care about. So we'll switch back, and we'll show you how to actually use property sets
All right, let me take that out.
to restrict the properties that you retrieve from an item.
Oops. Bring it to the right view. Pull the output window down.
So remember, the view object is our filter object. It's where everything hangs off of that we actually want to set during a query. So off the view, we'll set a new property set. And we're going to use an item schema here. So item schema is our default base type for properties hanging off of the item class. So we'll take an item schema.subject, and that is because the subject hangs off of every single item in Exchange, whether it's a contact or an email. They all have this base type of item schema of items. Properties that hang off of appointments use the appointment schema. So we'll use appointment schema.end and start, because those are the properties only hang off of appointments. So these schema classes directly mirror the object classes that I showed you earlier, the item classes that I showed you earlier. Great. So all we've done is now create a new property set, added 2 additional properties that we want to be retrieved during this find items, and let's run the code and look at the debug output and see what happens.
All right, let me pull up the output window. See that run, and I will clear the output from last time and run again. So I'm going to hit retrieve appointments.
Okay, it's going out to the data center again, and it's going to be sending the request up. You can take a look. It actually came back much faster. You can see it didn't scroll through nearly as much. It's because now we've got the subject, we've got the start, and we've got the end. So whenever you write code against Exchange, the easy default thing will be just to use not to specify anything for your property set, and you'll get all the properties back. That's there so that you can quickly get your code up and running. But if you're an ISV, you're writing an application that you want to be highly tuned against Exchange, Always use property sets to only request exactly what you need and nothing more. This all gets translated into store calls at the back end, I/O, which we're trying to minimize. So again, make smart calls, and your application will scale much better. Alice, if you can scroll up and show them at the top what your request actually looked like when it went out to the server.
I can do that.
You can see that we also trace out, if you keep going up right here, this is the request that was actually sent. You see the SOAP headers that were sent. We're using the 2007 SP1 schema version. You can see that we're setting the subject, start, and end, and we're just requesting those properties. Another great use for this trace feature is even if you can't use the managed API for some reason, if you're on a non-Windows platform or can't use .NET, we will trace out the full requests for you. And you can just take these requests and stick them into your application. And you can actually then code with the managed API and then transition that code over into your application. See a lot of people nodding and thinking, yeah, maybe that's how I'll actually use it. I think that's a perfectly valid and great way to actually use the managed API. Oh, super.
There was one other thing about the ID is always returned with every message that you get.
That's right. Yeah, we always return the ID. You can see here that we request ID only, and then the response that comes back, you'll see the IDs coming back. And the reason is, if you actually scroll to the right, Alice can show you that we return back a change key. And a change key is essentially our version for an item. So you can tell whether an item has changed on exchange simply by looking at the change key, inspecting it. If it's a different change key from the last one you retrieved, it's a new item. Our synchronization protocol relies on change keys to tell you when an item has changed, and you can actually see that if the change keys change, your local copy is invalid, and you need to update it. So, cool. We have still got time left, which is great. We've been so efficient in our development that we're just marching right through things. What next?
I don't know. What else do you want to do?
Well, let's try the next thing, sending a meeting request. I think that's exciting. Let's see how much it takes to actually take this from a recurring meeting to actually sending this recurring meeting.
Oh, you want to add the one line of code? I can do that. So we're going to go back to the appointment that we already, oops, let me take myself out of debug mode again. And we can just go back into the same existing appointment. Of course, this will create a lot of appointments on the calendar. But you can say my appointment, and then I want to send it. Oops.
We'll use the required recipients, which are, we have in the My Appointment class required recipients and optional recipients. The required attendees and optional attendees. Required attendees, just like you see in Outlook, the attendees that are required to come to a meeting. And we'll just add them in here.
Sorry.
.add, just like you'd expect with a standard collection. And here we can just use, yeah.
I'm going to use SMTP address, because I remember Jason's SMTP address.
So she's just going to send this mail to me. Very simple. You see, I would want to take it from an appointment created on just Alice's calendar to actually sending it to someone. There we go.
So I needed to check the address there.
Okay. And let's go ahead and send it off.
So this is my window. I'm about to create the appointment. Haven't sent it yet. So let me send it.
So it's going to go off. It's going to send that meeting request. Again, this is all in the cloud. I'm going to be logged into Outlook Web Access here as well. My machine, yes, D. And you can see that this item has already just showed up in my inbox here in OA. You can see that it's perfectly compatible with OA. It's all been formatted properly. It took one additional line of code to actually send the meeting request. And here it is. So I'm going to go ahead and accept it. So you can see, very simple. It takes something from, this is the full deal. Being able to send a meeting request, recurring meeting request, every week on Friday. Very simple to do. Okay, so I think that's a good kind of overview of our calendaring functionality that gives you a good idea of binding to folders, a good idea of how you actually interact with items. So let's switch back over and just go through some recaps today on what we've discussed. So the important things are always use autodiscover, as I've said, to bootstrap based on mailbox address. So we always want to never hard code. We always want to use autodiscover. You always want to use tracing if you're in doubt about what's actually being sent up to the server or sent back. We definitely recommend tracing for prototyping as well for other applications not using the managed API. Find appointments, find items. So find appointments and find items are our two query methods. You'll use those to efficiently query and retrieve items. And you'll specify property sets to those to help you narrow down the data that's returned from a query to Exchange Web Services. So going in kind of a call to action, what would we like our developers to do? We really want you guys first to check out Exchange Online. It's just, I think, really, really important for our ISVs out there to realize this is a new world. I mean, we had a whole PDC devoted to it. Things are really, we feel, going to be changing. Steve Ballmer recently said in the press that he saw up to 50% of mailboxes, exchange boxes being in the cloud in 5 years. And I really think that I don't think that's unreasonable to expect that. And I think that really means incredible new opportunities for ISVs to move into this market now of not having to sell something into an organization where you have to convince the organization that they need to train somebody to learn how to run this application, that they need to provision the hardware to run this application. All you need to do now is sell them on the idea that your application can run in some other cloud that you manage or that Microsoft manages and access their Exchange also in the cloud. And now for a customer, it's really, do they want these features? Do they want to pay this money? Not so much, do they want these features? Do they want to have a local person trained on site? Do they really want to take the overhead of upgrading it? All that comes along anytime you buy a new product. Really encourage you to learn more about Exchange Web Services on MSDN. We've got a great set of documentation which has been updated significantly with our SP1 release, and we'll be updating frequently, and we'll be updating it more in the next couple months with migration documentation on how to migrate from some of our legacy APIs over to our Exchange Web Services. We've already got some of that documentation in place, but we will be further fleshing it out over the next couple of months. I definitely recommend the Inside Exchange Web Services book. This is a book, MS Press. It was written by the Exchange team, Web Services team, a couple developers, a couple testers, and it is the Bible to Exchange Web Services. It does not yet include 2007 SP1, but it has got just great detail, 600 pages or so, of how to use Exchange Web Services. If you're thinking about doing it, go grab a copy of that book. We've also got a hands-on lab with the managed API. It's down in the hands-on lab room. If you go down there today, in the next couple of hours, you can actually go through and use it to prototype your scenarios out. Come ask us questions at the booth later in the day if you've got questions about how to do something. This is the first time that anybody outside of Microsoft will be able to actually use the managed API, prototype around with it, play around with it. We love your feedback. Love your feedback on what you've seen today. My alias, Jason Hen at Microsoft.com. Alice's is altang at Microsoft.com. Please send us your feedback on what you've seen, what you would like to see. We are very interested in taking that information back.
Oh, and also feedback on how easy you think it is to use. So if there are other areas where you'd like us to improve, things are hard to find, things are very easy to find, and you'd like us to repeat it, definitely give us the feedback on that as well.
We're definitely going through usability phase with it right now. We'd love your feedback, that early feedback before we release. Take a look at msdn.microsoft.com/blog/exchange-dev. That's our dev blog where we post the latest updates about what we're doing in Exchange Web Services. We've got a couple posts around the recent roll-up that went out and some of the new functionality that's been added in that. And then finally, that's where we will post when we actually release the managed API. We'll be releasing it to beta. We expect that to be early next year. It's not yet released to beta publicly yet. We don't have the bits at this time, but we expect them to be shortly. The only place you can actually get your hands on the bits is down in the hands-on lab today. And finally, please do fill out the evaluations. We take those very seriously. So please encourage everyone to go out and fill out an evaluation for the talk today. So we've got a good amount of time left. I'd like to open it up to any questions that we have out there and close off the talk. Yes? Hey, actually, come to the microphone if you wouldn't mind, please.
Have you done anything to address push-pull, getting events when something changed in the server?
Sure. So we have a rich notifications infrastructure with Exchange Web Services. We've got a pull model, which clients use that are typically clients which do not have internet accessibility to them. So for example, if they're behind a firewall, they would subscribe and they would occasionally pull the CAS server for new events. We've also got a push model, which the server will push notifications out to a well-known URL. And so the way that works is that we will actually subscribe to a notification and provide it an endpoint. And actually, I'd like to do some live coding just to kind of show you what this looks like in the managed API here. So this is going completely off the script here, but let's take a look at what this looks like just to make it clear.
And it's been a pretty popular question. So
Yes, we've gotten a number of questions on notifications, so I think it's good to actually do that. So I'm going to do a my service here, and I'll do subscribe to pull notifications. And in this case, I would pass a set of folder IDs, a timeout, so how long should this notification, this subscription stay around, a watermark, so our notifications do replay to watermarks so that we will not lose notifications. If, for example, your application goes down or your CAS server goes down, you store that watermark. You can use that watermark to replay events back to the point at which you last had a connection. And then the event types. So I'm actually just going to kind of go along here to show you event types. So if we look at the event types, you can see that we've got the copied event, moved event, deleted event, new mail event. And these are the event types that actually you can register for. These happen both on the items as well as on the folders. You can register for folder event types and item event types equally. The other option we've got is subscribe to push notifications. And here again, you pass in a folder ID. You pass in a URI. So that URI is the endpoint which you want Exchange to push that notification back to. So for example, what you will do is you'll implement a simple SOAP web service endpoint on your server anywhere in the world. Maybe it's on premises or maybe it's in the cloud. And Exchange will actually push out to you notifications about those events that have happened. So that you don't have to keep going back and polling the server. Exchange will actually do the work of pushing that data directly to you. Now, so that you know that that service is still up and hasn't gone down or the mailbox hasn't been deleted, we've got this frequency. And this frequency is how frequently we will send you a heartbeat to tell you that Exchange is still up and still servicing notification. You basically implement a timer on your side and say, hey, if I don't get a heartbeat in this status frequency time, I need to go back and resubscribe because maybe something's happened, my client's gone down and missed a subscription, so it's been deleted, something like that. So this is the push and pull subscriptions for notifications that we have today. Other questions?
Come on,
Yes.
you know you have another question.
You got more questions out there, I'm sure.
More live coding from Jason.
When this becomes available, how is it going to be delivered? So if I have code, does it require a new SP on Exchange, or will I just drop a DLL with my application, that kind of thing?
Yeah, great question. So we are developing the API to support Exchange 2007 SP1 and greater. So we expect that most of our customers today have already upgraded to 2007 SP1, but you will need to make sure that the customer has that deployed. We expect that nearly 100% do. Especially by the time we release the client API. We will have an MSI that will be downloadable from Microsoft, and you'll be able to either have your application download that MSI or point the user to download that MSI. We are looking at some other redist options as well, but I can guarantee we'll have the MSI that we'll download. Beyond that, as far as whether let people grab the DLL and redistribute it, we're still working through some of those details.
And in terms of fielding the notifications, like for example on this push notification, the stuff that comes in is basically going to be the same no matter which API you go through, right?
The stuff that comes in will basically, so on the push notifications, is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
So we've got a SOAP contract that we've defined, basically that your endpoint would just implement. Mm-hmm. And all requests, all push notifications that come into that endpoint would fit that SOAP contract. And basically they would be sending either a folder event or an item event. And so you can tell very well from looking at that WSDL file what the expected data coming back is for each notification.
Okay, so I mean, because what I've discovered in using push notifications is that, for example, if I want to see if there's any changes on a particular calendar, I get an awful lot of notifications that come in telling me that the calendar folder has changed, which I don't care about.
Right.
And so it's like a 3-to-1 ratio.
Sure. So there are some techniques that we're going to be blogging about and documenting about as well in terms of filtering those out. Mm-hmm. But you're correct that we do return folder events as well as item events for those. And in general, if you don't care about the folder events, you should just ignore the folder events. There are certain properties like the modified, which happens a lot on the calendar folder. So we'd also recommend don't use all the event types, really only use the event types that you care about, and always restrict yourself to those and then work up from there. We're looking at what ways we can potentially do more filtering client side, but at this point, we would still be pushing those out as well.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Other questions? No other questions.
Nobody
Okay.
wants to see more live coding from Jason?
Okay. Okay, one more question. Encourage one more person to. Good.
Mine's somewhat esoteric, but does this support public folders, or are they still sort of the black sheep of the Outlook family?
Well, they're still for the black sheep, but we do support them. so I can actually show you here that, I mean, our stance on that hasn't changed. We still support public folders, and we realize that it is important to a set of our developers. We do encourage our developers to, encourage you to look at SharePoint. SharePoint is really where we're evolving a lot of that same kind of functionality as opposed to public folders, but we know there's a lot of applications out there using public folders today, so our goal is to enable those kind of scenarios as well. So what I can do, for example, here is let me just do I'll do an item, my item, and I'll just go to my service, and actually what I want to do is a folder. Let's do a folder instead. My public folder. And what I'm going to do is do folder.bind. Again, folder.bind is your friend. And I'm going to do my service. And here I'm going to use the well-known folder ID. And again, you can see this is where the well-known folder IDs are also your friends. And you can see we've got the down here the public folders root. Public folders root is where you'll start for public folders. And then from there, you can use traverse the folder hierarchy and find the hierarchy or find a particular folder that you want. And then beyond that, it's just like dealing with normal items. You get an item back, you save an item. Just like you can subscribe to public folders, subscribe to push notifications for public folders, just like you would for normal folders. So, yes, no problem. Any other? Yes.
Jason, can you just clarify? There's no bits available right now, but it is available in the hands-on lab?
Yeah, you can go down in the hands-on lab and actually try this out and come ask questions, give us feedback. We don't have bits available, downloadable yet that we'll support. Yeah.
Jason, if I'm not mistaken, they are available in Metro, right?
Yes, if you're in the Metro program, so if you're an ISV that is in the Unified Communications Metro program, of whom we've got some contacts. Albert right there is a contact, actually. He's setting himself up. If you're an ISV and you would actually like to get pre-release bits of both RC2 of Unified Communications Server, as well as of the Managed API, we can work on getting you into that program. If you're an ISV, you have an application that's under development that you want to develop, you can talk to Albert about that and actually get into that program and get your hands on those bits earlier.
Yeah, so in that case, if you are interested, if you have a project that needs this now, give me your business card, write Metro at the back, and then I will make sure that the people reach out to you. And by the way, it's mostly for ISVs, but if you're a corp dev and you have a project, give me your business card as well.
Okay, I guess another question.
Hey, you talked about Windows integrated authentication, right?
Yes.
What we found is, we come from a client, we make a request, and then we have to go to the web service. Mm-hmm. We are already using the web service. We have to put those credentials, right?
I'm sorry, I missed that.
You have to mention those credentials.
Uh-huh.
So is there any way we can impersonate
Yes.
that user?
Yes, there is. And let me show you how you would do that. In the client API, we've actually got, off of the My Service object, it's impersonated user ID. And that's actually where you would pass in, let's see if we hover over this, you can see that it takes a impersonated user ID. And it could be connected ID type. So this is the different ID types. You can do here let's see.
You can do an SMTP address as well.
Yep. You can do a principal name, so a user principal name. You can do a SID or an SMTP address.
Okay.
There is a set of permissions that you have to set up on the mailbox. Alice, do you want to go through that?
Sure. You have to. Do you want to talk about RBAC?
Yeah. No, about the echoing on the CAS.
Oh, yes. You have to make sure that the mailbox is set up to accept impersonation, and then you also have to set a permission on the CAS to say that the CAS is allowed to do impersonation as well.
Okay.
So.
And about the public folders?
Yeah.
We can put any item into the public folders, right? What we do is we publish some forms into the public folders.
Uh-huh.
And then we have some registering functionalities there, actually.
Okay.
We register those forms.
Uh-huh.
So can we do that to these web services?
You cannot register the forms through the web services. You'll need to register the forms separately. You can register them with OA, potentially, or through Outlook, but you cannot do that through web services.
Okay.
We do have a lot of documentation on impersonation on MSDN, where you can find more about the ACLs that you actually have to set on the CAS server and on the service account.
And we're about to do a blog post on the difference between impersonation and delegation, because that's another question that we get a lot of confusion around.
Yeah,
so
many
that'll
of
be
you
posted
guys
soon.
that were using WebDAV were probably using delegation. And with web services, we've invented essentially this impersonation model, which we feel is much better, more scalable than delegation.
And totally depends on what your scenario is. Depending on what it is, you might want to use impersonation or you might want to use delegation. So you can come by afterwards and we can talk about it more in detail, or we'll be posting the blog post as well soon.
Okay. Other questions? No questions? Okay. Thank you very much for coming today. We'll be down at the booth for a while this afternoon before 3 and everything breaks up. So please stop by if you have any further questions.
And thank you again for waking up so early to come to our session.
Yes, thank you.